Hey guys, it's Sign here with HobbiesofaMan once again, and today we're going to be doing another Ramble video. And I'm not really sure if this is going to be a good video or not. I might be saying things that people might not like, or I might be saying things that are completely true, but we don't really want to talk about it yet, so I don't know. This is a video that comes out of last month's Ramble, also a few videos that I've seen. One by Criminali where he explains, or he talks about male readership, that I've commented on before and I've mentioned on the channel here. I don't remember the video, but I will post it on the iCard above so you guys can go watch that video. You guys can go find my response to this video at some point. And I also want to talk about this because, I really like Michael K. Vaughan's channel and he focuses on a lot of this stuff. So I want to talk about pulp fantasy. And I think more broadly, I want to talk about male adventure fantasy or male fiction. And how that is important for young male readers, especially from the perspective I'm coming from, which is I was born in '99. I grew up when we were being pushed to read a lot in school, but I also grew up in a time where YA fantasy was quickly shifting from kind of inclusive, everyone can read this stuff, to a female-centric kind of thing. Now, I could be wrong about the fact that it was inclusive because I honestly don't really remember that many female writers and characters when I was young, first starting to read YA fantasy, but that quickly became very irrelevant because of the big, massive surge of female writers and female main characters post, basically 2 years after I started reading, 2 or 3 years after I started reading YA fantasy. But growing up, the middle-aged stuff, that was definitely pretty broad. I remember reading the Magic Treehouse books that had a female and male lead, and they were really, really good. I remember reading Geronimo Stilton, which was a mouse detective character. The main character was male. But I remember very distinctly a female mouse character was constantly in his books. Now, I could be imagining that, but I feel like I remember that. And it's been many, many years since I read a Geronimo Stilton book, so I could be wrong, right? And I also remember, Junie B. Jones and characters like that, right? And so I know that middle grade fantasy, at least, was pretty, equal when it came to those things. But YA fantasy, which is the fantasy that I think most people read most often, it's very definitely lacking when it comes to providing the male readers something enjoyable. Now, I don't mean that the female-centric stuff is not enjoyable for male readers. I mean, I enjoyed many of those stories. I enjoyed Hunger Games and all of the dystopian books that came afterwards, like Divergent and Matched and stuff like Uglies and other James Patterson works and stuff like that, right? But I quickly read all of the ones that I liked. I even read Twilight and a bunch of other, female-centric things that all of my female friends were pushing. I got into fan fiction and stuff because, at that point I was like, okay, there's nothing left for me to read that I enjoy. Everything else that I can get my hands on that has a male character is actually not that good. I used to read these Septimus Heap books, which were kind of like a medieval fantasy plus Harry Potter kind of character, but only some of them were good. There was also the Nicholas Flamel series, which was quite good, but that one had a male and a female character, main characters, and actually the female character was actually more important than the male character. I can't remember their names. She had magic that smelled like vanilla, and he had magic that smelled like oranges, and Nicholas Flamel had magic that smelled like mint, and the main bad guy had magic that smelled like sulfur. So that's really all I remember about that series. I have the first 3 or 4 books. And then I remember the Werewolf series, which is a series I found much later in my reading journey. And this one was quite good. It basically was like Game of Thrones, but with were creatures. So it was like Game of Thrones for YA. And it also had this added element, which was the main character is a werewolf. The main bad guys are were-lions. And everyone around them that was important, that was a royal character, was a were something, right? So there was a were shark that was a big pirate captain. There was a were bear that was like one of the main lady characters. There's a were fox that was like the main love interest for the male character. There was a were pig, were boar actually, I think is what it was, who was the main character's best friend, who was kind of like a Neville Longbottom kind of character. And like the second or third in command that was bad was a were rat. And like that stuff was great, but I quickly felt like I exhausted all of those books. You know, I read Harry Potter and Percy Jackson and I'm Number 4, and you know, I tried to get my hands as much stuff as I could, but eventually I ran out of those and Aragon and stuff. And then I read through as many of the female-centric stuff that I could read, and then I basically stopped reading for a few years because nothing that I picked up was interesting to me. Now, that might be because I lost interest in reading, because I was focusing on TV and stuff, but I really do think that it was because there was nothing more for me to read that fit my interest and my desires at the time. Until, and actually this might have been before, but then it kind of dealt with my issue. Let me actually set up the timeline here. So I was always a reader. My dad would read stories to me when I was a little kid. I basically memorized the stories because I asked him to read them to me so many times. My dad, to this day, mentions or complains, I guess, about the fact that he would try to go to bed, but I would make him read my book, and when he tried to make the story faster, I would force him to go back and tell it correctly because he didn't say it right the first time, which was a really cute story. But it really cements the fact that I was a reader from early on. I remember voraciously, you know, going to the library and getting all the Geronimo Stilton and Magic Treehouse books that I mentioned. And then I remember in 4th grade, I got my hands on some cool sci-fi stuff, which was the Hard Contact novel, which was the first book in the Republic Commandos novels, and was basically like Star Wars Halo. And it was really awesome. I loved it. I also remember that 4th grade was when my true love for reading really came into fruition, because my 4th grade math teacher at the time, who was married to my 4th grade English teacher, would read to us after we finished our math assignments. And that year he decided to read us a book that he was reading from the library by Isabel Allende called The City of Beasts, which was the first book in a 3-book series called The Memoirs of Jaguar and Eagle. And I loved that book. He let me borrow it, even though it was not his, it was from the library, but he let me borrow it for a few days. I read that book, I gave it back to him, he read it to us in class, and from there, that plus Hard Contact was the start of my love for reading. And this continued to develop. I did a lot of reading. And in middle school, I ended up in the advanced English class, and one of our tasks for the year was a reading log where you had to read at least 50 books. And because we were all smart kids and super achievers or overachievers, and our teacher bragged about one of her previous students reading 89 books, I was like, I'm gonna read 100. And so I read and I read and I read, and I actually ended up reading about 130 or 140 something books that year. And I got this high on finishing a book, so I kind of kept going with that. And at that time period, I remember reading Hunger Games, because I bought that at the Scholastic Book Fair. I remember reading Guardians of Ga'Hoole and The Wolves of the Beyond, which is another Guardians of Ga'Hoole series. I read some of those in audiobook because you could rent them at the time, and they were like these little like iPod Nano things that you just had to plug in your earphones to. I read this book called Epic, which is actually maybe the first game-lit book I ever read, and I didn't know it was game-lit at the time. I tried reading some of the Avalon books, but I never got into them. I didn't read Harry Potter until much later, but I eventually did read Harry Potter. I tried reading Aragon those first years, and I got halfway through Bersinger, and then I didn't really enjoy it. Or maybe it might have been Eldest, actually. I don't remember, but it was one of those. I consumed the Percy Jackson series, very quickly. I got into the second Percy Jackson series a lot, and actually, the book that most stands out to me from that time period, besides The Hunger Games, which I read on repeat for many years, was I'm Number 4, which I mentioned before. And I'm Number 4 was a really cool series about these alien kids that moved to our world in order to avoid persecution from these Mogdians. I think they were these like evil aliens, or basically also like humans. And I really liked that series. I only read about 5 of the 7 books, and I think at some point the duo that created those books, one of them got caught for doing something illegal and gross. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I do think it was like CP, something like that. And so I never bothered finishing them, but I do still own them. And then in 7th grade, I moved schools. I went to I guess it's like a private school. And that's where my reading journey kind of took the turn that it took, that I mentioned before, which is, I read through all of the male-oriented books that were popular at the time. I read all the female-oriented books that were popular at the time. And then I stopped reading for a few years in like 9th and 11th grade. And then actually maybe 10th and 12th. Like I still read, but it wasn't like as much as before. And it was something that I kind of lost interest in. And I think it was mostly because I didn't really have books that I liked. However, in the 2012s, which was when I was like 13, the John Carter of Mars movie came out. And so I got my dad to buy me this Kindle set of all 12 John Carter novels. And I read the first few. I liked them. I thought they were cool. And then one day, I found those books again, kind of randomly, at a used bookstore, and that it reignited my interest in the series, and that also actually ended up being why I got back into reading. I got back into reading because of John Carter of Mars. I read through about 7 or 8 of the novels. I can't remember which one I finished. I think the last one I clearly remember was Chessmen of Mars, which I think is like 7 or 8, because it's the first 3, which end with Warlord. Then there's like the 3 that are about other characters like Thuvia and Lana and the son of John Carter. And then there's like the ones that go back to John Carter. And I think the 7th one or the 8th one is Chessmen of Mars. And I thought that was really cool because I like chess. I play chess in high school, and I actually go to a school that's really popular for chess, even though I don't play on their team. And I really enjoyed the Chessmen of Mars thing, right? But I never finished that novel, and I never finished the series. But from there, I finally found something that brought my interest to bear, right? And then from there, actually, I ended up finding booktube and found male content creators that appealed to me. Because there's like 2 different types of male content creators when it comes to booktube. There's like the ones that are like, I don't know, like I don't know how to phrase it, but like the ones that are like basically reading the same stuff that the female content creators are, and then the ones that read some of that sometimes but are mostly focused on male-oriented stuff. And I found all of the ones that were interested in male-oriented stuff, and I started watching their videos, and I found a bunch of female content creators that were really into fantasy stuff as well. And so my world opened up to Brandon Sanderson and to Jim Butcher, and actually an old lady that owned this bookshop that I used to go to when I didn't want to go to my usual bookstore, taught me or showed me Jim Butcher. She told me, hey, have you ever read this guy? You might be interested in him. And I thought he was a Western novel writer. And at the time I was like, I'm not interested in Westerns. And she was like, no, you clearly don't know who he is. He's not a Western writer. Here's some books that are from him. And so she gave me Furies of Calderon. And that was, I think, the first adult epic fantasy book that I ever read. I mean, I've read other like adult fantasy books or adult fiction books. Like I read the Halo novels, and I read Hard Contact and all of the other Republic Commandos novels and stuff like that. And obviously some old sci-fi. Like I'd read some Dune and some Isaac Asimov, but that like those aren't necessarily classified as adult science fiction. They're just kind of classified as classics, right? And so Furies of Calderon was the first adult fantasy that I read. And I read that starting into university. And then there was a time period at the end of 12th grade into university where I didn't really read much again. I kind of fell out of the habit. Mostly I just had other stuff going on, and I was not like out of all of the things that I like to do, reading was pretty low on the list. I was mostly consuming fan fiction at the time. and that was mostly like in between, books. It also had these books that I liked that were science fiction, that were by Evan Curry. They're called Odyssey 1. This is a great science fiction series that I would read on repeat. It was like those books plus the Fears of Calderon series, or what are they called? I can't remember. It's like a Roman name, but I would read those. And then I found Brandon Sanderson. I think in the winter of my second year at university, I ended up reading, the Stormlight Archive, and that opened my world to Brandon Sanderson and the Wheel of Time and all this other stuff. And that caught us up to here. But I really do think that I owe my continuous love for reading, my current love for reading, to Edgar Rice Burroughs. Now, I don't have a John Carter novel to show you, but this is as close as I'm going to get because it's another Edgar Rice Burroughs book. And this is Tarzan. This is the fourth book in the Tarzan series. And I think that pulp fiction, old pulp fiction from 1912 into the 1940s period, and men's adventure fiction, which is something that you don't really see published all that often nowadays, is really important for male readers. And it has to be more accessible than it is currently. Because many young men, I think, go through this process that I went through, which is, okay, I like reading as a kid. Yes, I have video games and stuff like that, but reading is also a fun activity as long as I'm reading the right books. And then when you get into middle school and stuff and you kind of start seeing that, hey, none of these books really appeal to me anymore, you stop losing interest and video games take up more time. And so even though there's many ways for you to get the right book, you don't, because they're not really accessible. They're not really what is selling, right? And I think that there is a few solutions to this. I think the easiest solution would be to just remake and republish and re-edit some of these very classic, epic, awesome pulp series and make them accessible for young men, for teenagers, really. And the other one, which I mentioned before on Criminality's video, is make comic books and manga more acceptable or more accepted as reading, as literature. Because I went through this in high school. Actually, I had really, really empathetic English teachers, really avant-garde English teachers that were willing to say, okay, a comic book or a manga is literature. It is possible to do a book report on this and stuff like that. But I accept it, but other people will not. So we still have to read real books, right? But I think that we need to change that. I think that we, people my age that are going to become part of the workforce soon, or already part of the workforce, and will be kind of the main people to shape, young people in the future, should really be more accepting of this stuff as literature, as important, meaningful stuff. Because, maybe superhero fiction that is very serialized and that just kind of goes in circles and stuff like that is not necessarily super high level of artistry, but things like Invincible or certain manga, things that are creator owned, that are more succinct and that are not about spinning their wheels constantly for the sake of making money and cheap entertainment, that has very little value beyond that, are meaningful, right? Like My Hero Academia or One Piece or Invincible or Sweet Paprika or whatever other indie, or creator owned or close to creator owned books that you can think of, or maybe even some superhero comic books that are self-contained stories like Watchmen, have inherent value to them in terms of literature, in terms of the human condition and stuff like that. And I think that we need to be better about that. But ultimately, I do think we need to be better about making sure that the pulps stay alive, that the pulp heroes of yesteryear retain relevance and still, have things to do. And also to create new pulp-style heroes, new sword and sorcery fantasy, new sword and sandal or planetary romance fiction that is appealing and good and meaningful and awesome and, reflects Conan or Tarzan or, some of the other Burroughsian heroes like John Carter or the guy from Amtor, I can't remember his name, Carson of Venus. And maybe also have some less good series like Gore, which is a Burroughsian pastiche, a Martian pastiche, and other, Conan pastiches as well, and have them be their own kind of thing as well that is easily accessible. And, I'm only talking about the fiction fantasy stuff, but there's also action adventure thriller stuff like James Bond books or Western books like Long Arm or Executioner or, all of those types of things. I think they need to be more accessible. I think they need to be easier to find and also not seen as lesser than, right? And I guess a lot of female-oriented YA fiction is still seen as lesser than, and maybe we shouldn't do that, but we should at least make it more accessible for male readers to also get access to stuff like that, right? Like at the same level, but oriented for males. And that is usually what these pulp books kind of do, right? So, yeah, that's kind of my weird rant for the month, or the second one for the month. I kind of made it about my reading journey. That wasn't really the point of this initially, but it kind of became that. So that will be kind of the point of this video. It'll be my reading journey and why pulps are important and why we should like comic books. I guess that's what the title's going to be. But yeah, let me know your thoughts about this. Let me know what you guys think. Am I right? Am I wrong? What are your reading journeys like? What did you guys experience growing up? Am I wrong? Is it just a like my experience, very focused on myself, or not? Like in my experience, all of the male friends that I had growing up also went through the same thing, and most of them actually stopped reading as soon as they had access to like an Xbox 360 and they didn't have new male-oriented books that they liked, right? So that's kind of what happened there. But yeah, thank you guys very much for watching. Let me know what you thought down below, and thank you guys once again. I keep saying that, but I really do mean it. Thank you guys, and see you guys later.